welcome to the next edition of the BriefingsDirect Voice of the Customer podcast series. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Interarbor Solutions, your host and moderator for this ongoing discussion on digital transformation success stories. Stay with us now to learn how agile businesses are fending off disruption in favor of innovation. Our next Cloud Strategies Insights interview focuses on how IT architecture and new breeds of service providers are helping enterprises manage complex cloud scenarios. We'll now learn how composable infrastructure and auto-scaling help improve client services, operations, and business goals for a New York cloud support provider. Here to help us learn what's needed to reach the potential of multiple and often overlapping cloud models, we're joined by Arthur Rayinger. He's Cloud Practice Lead and Chief Cloud Architect at International Integrated Solutions, or IIS Limited, in New York. Welcome, Arthur.
Hi, thank you so much, Dana. Really appreciate being on the show here.
Glad you're with us. Hey, how is architecture and new breeds of service providers coming together? What's different now for architecture when we've got cloud, multi-cloud, hybrid cloud than, say, even just 3 or 4 years ago?
So I think a lot like the technology trends themselves, everything is accelerating. Before you would have 3 or even 5-year plans that were developed out by the business to reach certain business outcomes, and then they would design the technology to kind of support that, and it was heads down until I build my rocket ship. And I think it's changed where things have accelerated to now it's kind of a 12-month strategy that needs to be modular enough to be reevaluated at the end of those 12 months and be re-architected almost as if it was Lego blocks, if that makes sense.
More moving parts, less time.
Absolutely.
So how do you do that?
Well, you leverage different cloud service providers, you leverage different managed services providers, and your traditional value-added resellers like International Integrated Solutions in order to meet those business demands, which we've seen a large push around automation, orchestration, and auto-scaling. Mm-hmm. It's being a way to achieve those business initiatives at that speed.
Yeah. So when you've got this cloud continuum, you're choosing what workloads and what data should be on-prem, what should be in a cloud, multi-clouds perhaps. Trying to do this as a regular IT shop, buying it, specifying, integrating it, seems like it's begging a lot of the traditional skill sets. So how is the culture of IT adjusting? We can talk about the technology, but it seems to me that you guys need to be thinking about people as well.
No, that's absolutely fair. Every organization has their own business transformation that they have to undergo, ourselves included, and we think that we're extremely proactive, in comparison. But just to give you the 2 ends of the spectrum, I see some companies that are developing in-house skill sets and trying to add additional departments that would be more cloud aware in order to meet those demands. And then on the other side, you have folks that are either leveraging partners like International Integrated Solutions that have acumen within those spaces to supplement their bench, or they're building out a completely separate organization that will hopefully take them into the new frontier.
All right, well, tell us about your company. What is it that you've done to transform? How have you taken what may have been a business that started some years ago in the financial sector in New York, for example? Have you matured? How have you expanded? And where do you go after that?
Sure. International Integrated Solutions has spent the 26 years building out an amazing book of business and amazing relationships with a lot of enterprise customers. But as times change, you need to be able to add on additional practices like our cloud practice, like our managed services practice, be able to take the things and the knowledge that we have around traditional IT services and then add in the fact that we have internal developers and delivery consultants that are very well versed and aware of this new architecture so that we can marry the two together and help organizations meet that new end state. It's very easy for startups to just go 100% to the cloud and just kind of run with it, right? It's a little bit different when you have 2,000 existing brown space applications and you want to look to the future as well. So it's nice to have someone that understands both of those worlds and the appropriate way to integrate them.
Mm-hmm. So I suppose there's no typical cloud engagement, but what's becoming clear as perhaps a common hurdle that organizations are facing as they go from that traditional mindset to the more cloud-centric thinking and the cloud-centric hybrid deployment models?
So the concept of auto-scaling or bursting has become very, very prevalent, and you see that within different lines of business, ultimately all asking for essentially the same thing, and the cloud is a pretty good answer to that. At the same time, you really need to understand your business and the triggers and be able to put the necessary intelligence together around that capability in order to make it really beneficial and really align to the ebbs and flows of your business. So that's been it's been one of the things that are a very, very common request across the board. Other things that we've done is we've built out solutions that include some intellectual property from IIS and our developers, and some cloud management tools built around backup to the cloud to eliminate tape and modernize backup for customers, to build out a dedicated object store that customers can own that also tiers to the different public cloud providers out there. And we've done this in a very, very repeatable fashion so that our customers get the cloud consumption look and feel, right? And we've leveraged very, very innovative, I'll say contractual arrangements to allow customers to consume against a scope of work rather than on a lease. And we've been able to marry that with the different standardized offerings out there to give someone the head start that they need in order to achieve that objective.
So it's interesting you brought up the cloud consumption model. Organizations want the benefit of a public cloud environment or user experience for bursting, for auto-scaling, price efficiency, but they might want to have it on premises, or they might want to use a managed service, or they might want to take advantage of public, but only in some instances under certain circumstances. So how are you working with companies like HPE, for example, to provide them with sort of this composable, auto-scaling capability, look and feel of public cloud, but maybe on their terms on their private cloud?
So one, before to even take a step back, I feel like now it's a multi-cloud strategy. Like, it was one thing to say I'm only on-prem. Now I'm using this one cloud, but my risk execs have now identified the fact that I use just one cloud is now this is my problem. So we try to standardize everything through a single cloud management stack for our customers, and we're agnostic to a whole slew of tool sets around both orchestration and automation to be able to help them achieve that. And then you look at some very unique things that HPE has done specifically around their Synergy platform to allow for that cloud management and that cloud automation to be able to actually deliver true composable infrastructure, which has huge value around energizing companies' goals, strengthening their profitability, boosting productivity, enhancing innovation, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And then we've been able to extend that into the public cloud. So now we have customers that are truly getting the best of both worlds.
Mm-hmm. Now, I've had people come to me and say, what do you really mean by composable infrastructure? And I have my ideas about it, but I'd love to hear what yours are, being in the thick of things. So how do you define composable infrastructure?
It's having true infrastructure that you can deploy as code. And you'll hear a lot of folks say that, and what that really means is being able to standardize on a single RESTful API set that allows your platform to have that intelligence when you look at infrastructure as a service that you're technically running underneath, and then delivering things as either platform or software as a service from either a DevOps or to the actual lines of business or to your consumers. So it's the ability to bridge those two worlds. Traditionally, you may have underlying infrastructure that doesn't have the intelligence or doesn't have the visibility into the cloud automation. So I may be scaling, but I can't scale into infinity. And I really need the underlying infrastructure to be able to mold and adapt, right, in order to meet those needs. And we're finally reaching the point where we have that visibility and we have that capability, thanks to software-defined data center and a platform to ultimately be able to execute on.
I've had other people, when I finish telling them what I think composable infrastructure is, saying, well, who's the composer? I know who composes the apps, that's the developer, but who composes the infrastructure? And I don't always know how to answer that one. How would you go at it?
Sure. So this is a lot of the transformation that we talked about, and finding either different resources or cultivating your existing resources to gain more of a developer's view. But now you have IT operations and I have DevOps that are both going to be able to come into a single management console, be able to communicate effectively, and then script on either side in order to either compose based on the code requirements or be able to put guardrails on different segments of their workloads in order to say, dictate importance or say, here are the guidelines in which my developers can ultimately make those requests or modify the environment, compose it.
So when we get to composable infrastructure in a data center or a private cloud, that's fine, but that's sort of like 2D chess. Sure. When I think about multi-cloud or hybrid cloud, that's sort of like 3D chess. So how do I compose infrastructure? Who's the composer when it comes to deciding not just whether it's, supporting a workload in a certain way, but where it gets deployed and at what cost?
So we offer a series of consulting services around delivery, managed services, and actual development to take an existing cloud management stack, whether that is CloudForms or VRA, VRO from VMware, or if it's Terraforms. It really doesn't matter, but we're ultimately allowing that to be the single pane of glass, single console. And then because it's REST API integrations into those public cloud providers, we're able to provide that transparency, again, from that management interface, which mitigates risk, gives you control. And then we deploy things like Puppet and Chef and Ansible within those different VPCs or virtual private clouds within those public cloud fabrics, and then as well as underneath that cloud management stack, so you can have that uniformity and you could take that composition and that intelligence and bring it wherever you'd like, whether that's based on geography or a particular cloud service provider preference. Again, there's many different ways to ultimately achieve that end state. We just want to make sure that standardization, to your point, doesn't get lost the second you leave that firewall.
So it's interesting to me that we're sort of in the early days of this composability of infrastructure in a multi-cloud world, but as the complexity and as the scale increases, it seems likely to me that we're going to start to bring things like machine learning and artificial intelligence to bear, because humans doing this manually will sort of run out of runway. So is there, and I know it's a sort of projecting into the future, but do you see a role for an algorithmic, programmatic approach, putting in certain variables, certain thresholds, and if they cross, you change, contextual learning as you go, and then making this whole composable infrastructure part of a machine process?
So things that companies like HP have done, and their new acquisition Nimble, as well as Red Hat and several others in the industry, is to leverage the intelligence they have from all of their different support calls and lifecycle management across applications and be able to provide that feedback back to the customers. And in some cases, if you're tying it back to an automation engine, they'll actually give you the information as to how to solve your problem, right? So a lot of the precursors to what you're talking about are already in the works, and everyone is trying to be that data cloud management company. I think that it's really early to ultimately pick favorites, but you're going to see more and more standardization rather than having 50 different REST APIs that everyone is standardized on that are constantly changing, that I have to provide custom integration to getting into a single pane of glass that they'll be able to leverage across multiple cloud providers, leveraging again a lot of the same automation orchestration tool sets that we've talked about.
Yeah. I think HPE's got their sights on this with New Stack for sure. And
100%.
Right. So let's talk about when, not so much the future, because we haven't gotten there yet, but today, looking at composable infrastructure, auto-scaling, using things like Synergy. If you're an enterprise and you do this right, how do you take this up to the C-suite and say, aha, we told you so, now give us more so we can do more? How do you prove this in business terms? What are the attributes that make this distinct in a business setting?
So every organization is different. I've spent a good chunk of my career being tactically deployed within very, very large organizations that are trying to achieve certain goals. So for me, I like to go to a customer's 10K and the promises they've made their investors, and ultimately be able to marry back what this investment will do for the short-term goals that they're all being judged against from both a KPI standpoint and from the health of the company. So whether it's meeting DevOps challenges and timelines to be able to roll out new green space workloads, or if it's to be able to take data that sits within a traditional BI relational database that's dictating all the moving parts of this organization and be able to give access to some of that data to different departments that want to run big data analytics that aren't being done in the same kind of real time. These are the types of testing methodologies that we like to set up so that we can help a customer actually rationalize what this means today in terms of dollars and cents and what it could mean in terms of that perceived value.
Now, when you do this well, you get that agility and you get to choose your deployment models. It seems to me that there's going to be a concept that arises of minimal viable cloud or hybrid cloud. Are we really going to start to see IT costs on an operating level adjust favorably? Is this something that ultimately will be so optimized with higher utilization, leveraging the competitive market for cloud services that really meaningfully could decrease the total operating costs of IT in an organization?
So I definitely think that it's quite possible. The way that most organizations are set up today, and not all follow this, but typically IT operations rolls back into finance, right? So you sit underneath the CFO, like most other organizations do, and if a request gets made by marketing or sales or another line of business, it has to go up the chain, get translated, and come back down, and that's where a lot of...
It's just like procurement of any other service.
Absolutely. So a lot of times it's very difficult to push a rock up a hill. You won't have all the visibility unless you can get back up to finance or back over to that line of business. So if you're able to break down those silos, then I believe that your statement is 100% true. But changing all of those internal controls for a lot of these organizations is very difficult, which is why some are deploying net new teams, right, to be ultimately the future of their internal service provider IT operations.
Yes. Well, Arthur, I've been in this business long enough to know that every time we've gotten to the point where we think we're going to meaningfully decrease the IT costs, some other new paradigm of IT comes up that requires a whole new round of investment. But it does seem to me that this could be different this time, that we actually are getting to a standardized approach for workloads, and that traditional economics that hits any procurement service will become in effect here too.
Absolutely. One of the reasons that one of our big pushes was around object storage as a service that still allows for traditional file and block level support is because we're trying to help customers achieve that new economic view of what cost or what cloud ultimately provides them at that same price point, but still give them the risk and the visibility and control over their data. And I'll give you an example. There's a very large financial exchange that had a lot of IP data that they traditionally mined internally and provided back to different smaller financial institutions as a form of a service in these financial reports. And a few years back, they came to us and said, I really want to leverage the agility of AWS in terms of being able to spin up a huge Hadoop farm and mine this data very, very quickly and leverage that without having to increase my overall costs. But I don't feel comfortable providing that data into S3 within AWS, where now they have 2 extra copies of my data as part of the SLA. So what do? And we ultimately stood up this same object storage that I'm talking about directly next to AWS, so you wouldn't have to pay any data eviction. You can mine everything right there, leveraging their Redshift or Hadoop as a service. And then once these artifacts or these reports were created, they no longer have the IP. It came from the IP, but these are roll-ups and comparisons, so now they're not as sensitive to the company. We went ahead and put those into S3 and allowed Amazon to manage all of their customers' identity and access management to go ahead and get access to that. And that minimized a lot of risk for this exchange. We were able to not allow anyone outside of their organization to have to come behind the firewall anymore to get this data. You didn't have to worry about the SLAs associated with keeping this stuff up and available. And it became a really nice, true hybrid story. So these are the types of projects aspects that we really like to work with customers on, to be able to help them gain all of the benefits associated with cloud without taking on any of the additional risk or the negatives associated with jumping in both feet.
So you heard your customers, you saw a niche opportunity for object storage as a service. You've put that together. I assume that you wanted composable infrastructure to do that. So is this something on a HPE Synergy foundation?
So HPE Synergy doesn't really have the disk density to really get to the public cloud price point, but it does support object storage natively, so it's great from a DevOps standpoint for object storage. We definitely think that as time progresses and HP continues down the Synergy roadmap, that will eventually kind of fix itself. A lot of the world's centered around hyperconverged and this kind of mantra. The issue is I don't see compute and storage growing at the same rates, right? I see storage growing considerably faster than I do the need for compute. So this is a way for us to be able to help supplement a Synergy deployment or help our customers really get the true ROI TCO they're looking for out of that hyperconverged.
So maybe the question I should ask is, what storage providers are you using in order to make this economically viable for you?
We're absolutely using the HPE Apollo line and the different flavors of SSD down to SATA drives, and we're leveraging best-in-breed object storage software from Red Hat. We also have an OpenStack flavor as well, right? And then we leverage things like automation and orchestration technologies and our ServiceNow capabilities, all married with our IP, in order to give customers either the choice of buying this, deploying it, and having us layer services on top if you want, or if you want to consume a fully managed service for something that's on-prem, I have a per gig price and the same SLAs as those public cloud providers. So, it's really, all of it's coming together to allow customers to really have the true choice and flexibility that everyone claimed you had, 4 years ago.
Well, great. I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there. We've been exploring how IT architecture and new breeds of service providers are helping enterprises better manage their complex cloud requirements. And we learned how a composable infrastructure and auto-scaling capability has helped a New York cloud services company put together an innovative object storage as a service. So please join me in thanking our guest. We've been here with Arthur Ranger. He's the Cloud Practice Lead and Chief Cloud Architect at International Integrated Solutions in New York. Thank you, Arthur.
Thank you, Dana. I really appreciate being part of your program.
Glad you were here. And thanks to our audience as well for joining this BriefingsDirect Voice of the Customer Digital Transformation Success Story. I'm Dana Gardner, Principal Analyst at Inter Arbor Solutions, your host for this ongoing series of Hewlett-Packard Enterprise-sponsored interviews. Thanks again for listening. Pass this along to your IT community and do come back next time.